Picture a clearing deep in the Guyanese jungle, humid air pressing down, the sound of insects buzzing in the background. Hundreds of men, women, and children gather under a rusted pavilion, their faces weary but expectant. They had come here chasing a dream of equality and safety, following a man who once spoke of justice and hope. But what began as a sanctuary was about to become one of the most haunting incidents of the 20th century. Jim Jones, born in Indiana in the early 1930s, had built his reputation as a champion of racial equality and social justice. He fed the hungry, welcomed the marginalized, and promised a better world. To many, he was a visionary. Yet behind the sermons and community programs, he was quietly weaving a web of control. Members surrendered their money, their homes, even their private thoughts. In time, their loyalty was no longer voluntary. It was demanded. By the mid-1970s, pressure from the press and former members forced Jones to relocate his followers to Guyana. There, Jonestown rose from the jungle. But instead of paradise, it was a prison. The heat was suffocating, food was scarce, and loudspeakers carried Jones's voice day and night, warning of enemies and conspiracies. Escape was nearly impossible. Then came a turning point. Congressman Leo Ryan arrived in November 1978 to investigate. At first, the visit seemed calm, even staged, but secretly residents slipped notes begging for help. When Ryan tried to leave with a small group, gunfire erupted at the nearby airstrip. He was killed, along with journalists and defectors. That moment sealed Jonestown's fate. What followed was chilling. Jones gathered everyone and spoke of a revolutionary act. A cyanide-laced drink was prepared. Parents were told to give it to their children first. Some resisted, others wept, but armed guards stood watch. In less than an hour, over 900 lives were gone. Among them were more than 300 children. Here's a detail many overlook. Not everyone drank willingly. Some were injected, others coerced. The tragedy was not simply a collective choice. It was a collapse of freedom under absolute control. When authorities arrived, they found silence. Families lay side by side, and at the center, Jones himself was dead. The world was stunned. Newspapers called it unimaginable. Experts studied the psychology of obedience, and Jonestown became a symbol of how charisma can turn into domination. Decades later, the case still raises unsettling questions. How far can fear bend human will, and when does faith become submission? If stories like this make you reflect on the fragile line between trust and control, stay with us. We continue exploring real cases that reveal the darkest corners of human influence, because understanding them is the only way to guard against them. In the beginning, he looked like salvation. Picture 1956, a small storefront church in Indianapolis. The wooden pews are filling up with people the rest of America has turned away. Black families, white families, sitting together. In an era when that single act could get you attacked, threatened, or worse. At the front stands Jim Jones, 30-something years old, dark hair slicked back, eyes burning with conviction. And when he speaks, something shifts in the room. He doesn't preach fire and brimstone. He preaches justice, equality. A world where the color of your skin doesn't determine whether you eat tonight or sleep on the street. And people listen, because in 1950s America, torn apart by segregation laws and racial violence, those words are not just radical, they're dangerous. Other ministers are defending separation. Jones is serving free meals to anyone who walks through his door, organizing food drives, opening his church to the homeless. He calls it the People's Temple. And to hundreds of struggling families, it feels like home. Here's what most people don't know. Jones had been fascinated by control since childhood. He'd hold mock funerals for small animals, practice sermons in front of mirrors for hours, study other preachers not to learn their faith, but to learn their techniques. Even as a boy, he understood something chilling. People don't follow ideas, they follow feelings. And Jones was a master at making people feel seen. A single mother arrives at the temple, exhausted, broke, carrying 2 hungry children. Within days, she has food, childcare, and a community that wraps around her like a blanket. An elderly man, abandoned by his family, finds people who call him by name and ask how he's doing. A teenager, lost and searching, hears someone tell him he matters. This wasn't manipulation. Not yet. It was genuine help. Real programs. Tangible relief in a world that had offered nothing but closed doors. But behind the sermons and soup kitchens, something else was growing. A need. Not to help people, but to own them. Jones began asking for more. Small things at first. Volunteer on weekends. Donate a little extra. Attend every service. And because he had given so much, people gave back willingly. They didn't notice when the requests turned into expectations, when missing a meeting meant public questioning, when loyalty stopped being a choice and became a test. By the early 1970s, Jim Jones wasn't just a pastor anymore. He was becoming something far more dangerous, and the people who loved him were about to follow him into the jungle. It started with something small. Picture a Sunday evening service at the People's Temple sometime in 1968. The room is packed. Families are seated shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with humidity and the hum of anticipation. Jim Jones steps to the microphone. "I need to know," he says, his voice soft but cutting through the silence. "Who here is truly committed?" Hands rise. Of course they do. These people have been fed, sheltered, embraced. Commitment feels like gratitude. But then he asks for more. First, it's time. Volunteer every weekend, then every evening. Then, whenever he calls, people rearrange their lives, quit second jobs, pull children from school activities, because Jones has given them so much. How could they say no? Then it's money. 10% of your paycheck, then 20, then everything. Sign over your house, your savings, your car. It's for the community, he says, for the greater good. And here's where it gets chilling. He made them compete for his approval. Members would publicly confess how much they'd sacrificed, trying to outdo each other. "I gave my inheritance. I sold my mother's jewelry." The room would erupt in applause. Jones would smile, nod, and then turn to someone who'd given less. The shame was unbearable. People stopped asking questions, because questions led to something worse. Jones called them catharsis sessions. Public confessions held late into the night under glaring lights. If you'd criticized him, even privately, someone would report it. And then you'd stand in front of everyone while Jones dissected your thoughts, your fears, your secrets. He'd scream, whisper, joke, shame, all in the same breath. A woman admits she's been struggling with doubt. Jones asks who else has noticed her negative energy. Hands rise. Her own friends, her husband. One by one, they stand and list her failures, her weaknesses, things she'd shared in confidence, now weaponized. By the end, she's sobbing, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. And everyone else watches, learning the cost of disobedience. Here's what most documentaries miss. Jones didn't just control their actions, he controlled their reality. He staged fake attacks on the temple, gunshots in the night, bomb threats, anonymous letters threatening violence. His security team would rush in, armed and ready, proving that danger was real and constant. Members would huddle together, terrified, while Jones calmly assured them, "They want to destroy us, but I will protect you." Except the threats were fabricated. The letters were written by Jones himself. The attacks were theater designed to make people believe the world outside was hunting them. And it worked. Families stopped visiting relatives. Members cut ties with anyone who questioned the temple. The outside world became the enemy. Jones became the only safe harbor. Then came the loyalty tests. Late one night, Jones gathers everyone. His voice crackles over the loudspeakers. "The government is coming. We may have to make the ultimate sacrifice. Are you ready to die for this cause?" Adults line up. Children, confused and frightened, are told to drink a cup of red liquid. Parents hand it to them. Some kids cry, others obey. After they drink, Jones waits. Then he smiles. "That was a test," he announces. "You passed. There was no poison. But now I know who is truly loyal." People would later call these white knight drills, rehearsals for something unthinkable, conditioning people to obey even the most extreme command without hesitation. And with every test, resistance crumbled a little more. By the early 1970s, the People's Temple wasn't a church anymore. It was a machine designed to strip away independence, replace it with fear, and bind people so tightly to Jones that leaving felt impossible. Because where would they go? They'd given him everything: their money, their homes, their secrets. And he'd convinced them the world outside wanted them dead. The trap was complete, but the most dangerous part was still ahead. Because Jim Jones had found a place where no one could reach them. A place where his control would become absolute, deep in the jungle, far from laws, from family, from anyone who might ask questions, and he was about to take them there. By 1975, the walls were closing in. Former members were speaking out. Newspapers in San Francisco were running exposés with headlines that made people stop and stare. Stories of beatings, financial exploitation, children taken from their parents and raised communally. The kind of allegations that attract investigators, lawyers, and questions Jim Jones couldn't control. He could feel it, the scrutiny, the doubt creeping in even among his most loyal followers. So he did what cornered leaders often do. He found an escape route, but he called it paradise. "We're going to build a new world," Jones announced one evening, his voice electric with promise. "A place where we can live free from persecution, free from racism, free from the lies they're spreading about us." He gestured to a map. Guyana, a small country on the northern coast of South America, dense rainforest, politically sympathetic government, and most importantly, remote, isolated, beyond the reach of American authorities. The People's Temple had already purchased nearly 4,000 acres of jungle. There, Jones promised, they would create Jonestown, an agricultural paradise, a socialist utopia, a place where their children could grow up safe. Hundreds said yes. Some were true believers. Others were terrified of being left behind. Many had nowhere else to go. Jones controlled their money, their homes, their entire support system. Within months, they began arriving, and nothing was as promised. Picture this. You step off a small plane onto a dirt airstrip carved out of the jungle. The heat hits you like a wall, thick, wet, suffocating. The air smells of rotting vegetation and diesel fuel. Insects swarm immediately, biting exposed skin. Before you is a clearing hacked out of the forest. Wooden buildings with rusted metal roofs, mud paths, and surrounding everything, as far as you can see, is a wall of green so dense it feels alive. This is Jonestown. Here's what most people don't know. The agricultural paradise was a lie from day one. The soil was poor. Crops failed repeatedly. And the work schedule was brutal. 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, under a sun that turned the settlement into an open-air oven. Children hauled water. Elderly members cleared brush. Everyone worked until their hands bled and their backs gave out. Because Jones said productivity proved loyalty. The food situation was even worse. While Jones ate meat and fresh fruit in his private cabin, members survived on rice and gravy. Portions were small. Malnutrition spread. People lost weight, got sick, but complaining meant you weren't committed to the cause. And everywhere, loudspeakers. They were mounted on poles throughout the compound, wired to Jones's living quarters. His voice would crackle to life at any hour. 2 in the morning, 4, dawn, always talking, rambling, warning about enemies plotting to destroy them. CIA agents hiding in the jungle, mercenaries preparing to attack. Sleep became a luxury. Privacy became impossible. Guards patrolled the perimeter, not to keep people out, but to keep people in. The jungle itself was a natural barrier. Miles of thick forest, venomous snakes, no roads. The nearest village, Port Kaituma, was hours away on foot through terrain that could swallow you whole. Escape wasn't just difficult. It was nearly suicidal, and Jones knew it. He began running drills in the middle of the night. Sirens would wail. Everyone would scramble to the central pavilion while armed security teams swept the compound. Jones would appear, sometimes calm, sometimes manic, talking about imminent invasion, about the need to be ready for anything, including death. Here's the detail that changes everything. Several members did try to leave. They'd slip away during work details, disappear into the forest. But Jones had informants in Port Kaituma, Guyanese officials on his payroll. Within days, most were found and brought back. The punishments were public, humiliating, physical, a warning to everyone else watching. One young man who attempted escape was placed in a plywood box barely large enough to crouch in. He stayed there for days in the tropical heat. When he emerged, he couldn't walk, couldn't speak, just sobbed. The message was clear: there is no way out. By late 1977, Jonestown had become exactly what Jones wanted. Not a utopia, a kingdom, where his word was law, where doubt was treason, where nearly 1,000 people were trapped between the jungle and a man who'd convinced them the rest of the world wanted them dead. But back in the United States, families were organizing, demanding answers, pushing their congressmen to investigate, and one congressman listened. In November 1978, Representative Leo Ryan boarded a plane to Guyana. He was bringing journalists, congressional aides, and family members of Jonestown residents who hadn't been heard from in months. They were coming to see the truth. And when they arrived, everything Jim Jones had built in the jungle would begin to collapse, because some secrets are too big to hide, even in paradise. November 17, 1978. A twin-engine plane touches down on the dirt airstrip at Port Kaituma. The door opens, and out steps Congressman Leo Ryan, a Democrat from California known for doing things other politicians wouldn't, like personally investigating prison conditions by getting himself locked up, or now, flying into the Guyanese jungle to check on American citizens who'd gone silent. With him, 3 congressional aides, 9 journalists, and several family members who hadn't heard from their loved ones in months, some in years. They pile into a truck and a tractor trailer for the 6-mile journey through the jungle. The road is mud and ruts. Rain begins to fall. By the time they reach Jonestown, everyone is soaked, exhausted, and unsure what they're about to find. Then the clearing opens up before them, and it looks almost normal. Clean wooden buildings, gardens, children playing, and at the center, under a large open-air pavilion, hundreds of people gathering to greet them, smiling, clapping. A band starts playing. People dance. Jim Jones appears, flanked by aides, his sunglasses reflecting the late afternoon light. He extends his hand to Ryan. His voice is warm, welcoming. "Congressman, we're honored you've come all this way. Please, see everything. We have nothing to hide." For the next several hours, the visit unfolds like a carefully choreographed performance. Members give testimonials about how happy they are, how free, how Jonestown has changed their lives. Jones sits on a throne-like chair, watching, nodding, occasionally interjecting with humor or reassurance. The journalists take notes, film footage, interview residents who speak in glowing terms about the community. But then the sun sets, and cracks begin to appear. Here's what most people don't know. While the welcome party was happening, some residents had been locked in their cabins. Others were coached on what to say. Children were told to smile and stay silent. Security guards positioned themselves throughout the crowd, watching for anyone who might break script. But fear has a way of finding cracks. As darkness falls, and the visitors are shown to their sleeping quarters, a woman approaches NBC reporter Dawn Harris. She's trying to appear casual, but her hands are shaking. She slips him a folded piece of paper and walks away quickly. Harris waits until he's alone to read it. "Please help us get out of Jonestown." It's signed by 2 people, but Harris will receive more notes before the night is over. Slipped into pockets, hidden in handshakes, whispered requests when guards aren't watching. By morning, the count is clear. At least 16 people want to leave. Some are families. Some are individuals who'd been too terrified to speak up before. But the presence of a congressman, of cameras, of witnesses, it's given them a sliver of courage. Ryan agrees to take them. The atmosphere shifts immediately. You can feel it, the tension crackling through Jonestown like electricity before a storm. Jones's face hardens. His aides huddle. Security becomes more visible, more aggressive. One man, a Temple loyalist, suddenly attacks Ryan with a knife. It's chaotic. People screaming, the congressman wrestling the blade away, journalists capturing it all on film. Ryan is shaken but unharmed, but the message is clear. Leaving is betrayal. Still, Ryan pushes forward. By early afternoon on November 18th, the group prepares to depart. The congressman, his team, the journalists, and now a group of defectors, carrying whatever belongings they can grab, children in their arms, looking back at Jonestown one last time. They load into the same truck and trailer that brought them in. The ride back to the airstrip is tense, silent. The jungle feels different now, darker, watching. They reach Port Kaituma just as two small planes arrive to ferry them out. People begin boarding, filming. A sense of relief starts to settle in. Then a tractor appears at the edge of the airstrip. It's pulling a trailer. And on that trailer are men with rifles. What happens next unfolds in seconds but feels like slow motion. The tractor stops. Men jump down. They raise their weapons, and they open fire. Congressman Leo Ryan is hit. He falls. Cameraman Bob Brown keeps filming even as bullets tear into him. His camera captures his own final moments, the lens hitting the ground still running. Journalist Don Harris, photographer Greg Robinson, temple defector Patricia Parks, all gone. Others are wounded, bleeding, hiding under the plane's wings, behind wheels, anywhere that might offer cover. The attackers move methodically, checking bodies, firing again to be certain. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stops. The men climb back onto the tractor and disappear into the jungle. Survivors lie in the mud and grass, some crying, some too shocked to make a sound. A few of the plane's engines are destroyed. The other is barely functional but manages to take off with 5 wounded passengers racing to get help. But help is hours away. And back in Jonestown, 6 miles through the jungle, Jim Jones knows exactly what's happened. His people have attacked a United States congressman. There will be consequences, investigations, arrests. The world he's built is about to be torn apart, and he's already decided what comes next. If this story is gripping you, stay with us, because what happens in the hours after that airstrip is something the world still struggles to comprehend. The next chapter is the darkest, and understanding it matters more than ever. The sun is setting over Jonestown when the loudspeakers crackle to life. Jim Jones's voice echoes across the compound, calm, almost gentle. Everyone to the pavilion, now. We need to talk. People emerge from cabins, from fields, from the medical clinic. Children hold their parents' hands. The elderly move slowly through the mud. Within minutes, nearly 1,000 people are gathered under the rusted metal roof of the central pavilion. Jones sits in his chair, looking tired, defeated. His voice, usually booming, is soft, conversational, like he's sharing a secret. It's over, he says. They've attacked us. They've shed blood. And now they'll come for all of us. The military, the CIA. They'll torture our children, separate our families, destroy everything we've built. He pauses. Let that sink in. But we have one choice left, one way to leave this world with dignity, together, on our own terms. Here's what makes this moment so chilling. Audio recordings of it still exist. A tape recorder was running, capturing everything. And if you listen, and it's almost unbearable to listen, you can hear Jones speaking with an eerie calmness, almost hypnotic, like a father explaining why something difficult must be done. This is not suicide, he tells them. This is a revolutionary act. We're making a statement. We're showing the world we will not be taken. Large metal vats are brought to the center of the pavilion. Inside is a mixture: grape-flavored drink powder, water, Valium, chloral hydrate, and cyanide. The liquid is bright purple, almost cheerful-looking in the fading light. And then comes the order that breaks reality. Bring the children first. Mothers move forward, some crying, some blank-faced with shock. They're handed syringes without needles, just plastic tubes to squirt the liquid into their babies' mouths. Infants, toddlers, children too young to understand why their parents are doing this. The audio tape captures a woman's voice rising above the crowd. Christine Miller, a 60-year-old counselor who dares to speak up. "Is it too late for Russia?" she asks, referring to Jones's long-promised plan to relocate the community to the Soviet Union. Her voice shakes but holds firm. "I look at all these people, babies. I don't think it's too late to go there." Jones's response is measured, patient, but unyielding. He talks over her objections. Others in the crowd shout her down, call her a traitor, Someone yells, "We're all ready to go!" Christine Miller goes quiet. She'll be among the victims found hours later. The line keeps moving, parents administering the poison to their own children, then taking it themselves, lying down on the ground, in the grass, under the pavilion, holding each other as the cyanide begins its work. Here's the detail most documentaries gloss over. Not everyone went willingly. Evidence later shows that many people were forcibly injected. Needle marks found on bodies in places you can't reach yourself, between shoulder blades on the backs of arms. Some people were held down. Others tried to run and were stopped by armed guards surrounding the pavilion. On the audio recording, you can hear voices rising in panic, crying, children screaming, and underneath it all, Jones keeps talking, soothing, insistent. "Don't be afraid. It's just stepping over to another plane. Hurry, hurry, hurry. No more pain." But there is pain. Cyanide doesn't bring peaceful sleep. It brings convulsions, foam, gasping. And Jones knows this. He'd researched it, tested it. He knows exactly what he's asking them to endure. Still, he sits there, directing it all like a conductor, until nearly everyone is down. Then the tape cuts off. By nightfall, the jungle goes silent. The insects still buzz. The rain still falls. But no human voices, no children, no music from the pavilion that used to echo through the trees. Just silence. When Guyanese authorities finally arrive the next morning, after piecing together what happened from survivors at the airstrip, they're unprepared for what they find. Bodies everywhere, hundreds of them, lying in clusters, families curled together, a mother's arm still wrapped around her child. Elderly couples holding hands, people face down in the mud where they collapsed, trying to flee. The smell is already overwhelming in the tropical heat. Near the pavilion, they find Jim Jones. A single gunshot wound to the head, whether self-inflicted or delivered by one of his remaining loyalists, no one knows for certain. His death brings no justice, no answers, just an ending. The final count takes days to confirm because bodies are layered on top of each other. Parents covering children, people who drank the poison early, with others collapsing on top of them later. 909 people, gone. 304 of them children. The youngest, just 1 year old. Here's what haunts investigators most. Among the dead, they find scripted notes, typed letters, supposedly from members, explaining why they chose this. But the language is identical, the phrasing too similar. These weren't individual choices documented. They were propaganda Jones prepared in advance because he knew. He'd been planning this possibility for months. The white night drills, the rehearsals, the slow conditioning to accept death as loyalty. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born of desperation. It was the final act of a man who'd rather destroy everything than lose control. And in the jungle, under a rusted pavilion, surrounded by the people who'd trusted him with their lives, he got exactly what he wanted. Silence. November 19th, 1978. A radio operator in Georgetown, Guyana, receives a crackling transmission from the remote airstrip at Port Kaituma. The words come through broken, frantic, almost impossible to believe. Congressman down. Multiple casualties. Send help immediately. Within hours, the story breaks worldwide. At first, the reports focus on Leo Ryan, a United States congressman attacked and killed while investigating an American community abroad. That alone is unprecedented, shocking. But as Guyanese troops and American officials make their way to Jonestown the next morning, they discover something far worse. The phone lines to international newsrooms begin ringing nonstop. "We're getting reports of mass deaths in the jungle." Editors pause. Mass deaths? How many? Hundreds? Maybe more. The first photographs arrive by military transport. Black and white images that photographers can barely look at while developing. Bodies covering the ground like fallen leaves after a storm. The pavilion. The vats. The unbearable stillness of it all. By November 20th, every major newspaper in the world carries the story on the front page. Television broadcasts interrupt regular programming. Anchors struggle to find words adequate for what they're describing. The New York Times, 900 found dead in Guyana. The scale alone defies comprehension. 909 people. At the time, it's the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act. Nothing in modern history compares. But here's what makes the global reaction even more complex. How it happened. This wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated, systematic. And that raises a question no one wants to ask, but everyone is thinking. How could so many people be convinced to do this? Psychologists, religious scholars, cult experts, they all descend on the story, trying to explain. Theories emerge: brainwashing, coercion, mass psychosis. Each explanation tries to create distance, to make it seem like something that could only happen to those people, the vulnerable, the weak-minded, the fanatics. But then the victims' identities start coming out, and that's when the story changes. Among the dead, registered nurses, teachers, a woman who'd been a pianist with the San Francisco Symphony, veterans, social workers, college graduates, people with families, careers, and futures who'd made a conscious choice years earlier to join something that promised justice and community. Here's the detail that shatters the comfortable narrative. These weren't lost souls wandering in darkness. They were people looking for light. A woman named Phyllis Houston. She'd been a nurse, a mother, someone who cared deeply about civil rights. She joined the People's Temple because she believed in integration, in helping the poor, in building something better. Her family described her as intelligent, thoughtful, kind. She died in Jonestown alongside her children. Or Shandad James, a young teacher from Oakland who wanted to make a difference, who'd seen the temple feeding hungry kids and thought, this is where I can help. She wrote letters home about teaching in the jungle, about the community they were building, about hope. She never made it out. Investigators begin combing through evidence, audio tapes, financial records, testimonies from the handful of survivors who'd escaped into the jungle or been away during the final day. And a pattern emerges that's more disturbing than any simple explanation. This didn't happen overnight. It was incremental. A slow erosion of autonomy so gradual, most people didn't notice until it was too late. First, you donate time, then money. Then you move into communal housing. Then you stop talking to family who don't understand. Then you're isolated in the jungle, exhausted, malnourished, surrounded by armed guards and constant warnings about external enemies. By the time you realize you're trapped, all the exit routes have been sealed. Dr. Louis Jolyon West, a psychiatrist who studied the case, put it this way. These were not stupid people. They were people in pain, looking for solutions. And Jones gave them answers until those answers became chains. Here's what researchers found most chilling. Many victims had tried to leave. Letters discovered later show people begging relatives to send money for plane tickets. Some wrote in code, afraid their mail was being read, which it was. Others attempted escape and were caught, punished, and brought back as warnings. The choice to stay wasn't always a choice at all. And then there's the children, 304 of them, too young to choose anything. They were there because their parents sought safety, community, a better world. And they paid the ultimate price for their parents' trust in the wrong person. The funerals stretch across weeks. Families gather in cities across America, burying loved ones in coffins that had to be flown back from the jungle. Some bodies are never identified. Others remain unclaimed because entire families were lost. The trauma ripples outward. Survivors carry guilt that will haunt them for decades. How did I get out when they didn't? Why did I see the truth when others stayed blind? Could I have done more? One survivor, Odell Rhodes, later said he can still hear the screams when he closes his eyes. Another, Grover Davis, spoke about the weight of being one of the few left to tell the story no one wants to hear. But perhaps the most important lesson comes from something people don't want to accept. It could have been anyone. That teacher, that nurse, that caring, intelligent, hopeful person searching for meaning. They weren't fundamentally different from you or me. They made decisions that made sense in the moment. Small steps that led somewhere unthinkable. Jonestown became shorthand for blind obedience, for cult mentality, for tragedy. The phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid, though factually wrong, it was flavor aid, entered the language as a warning about following without questioning. But if we reduce it to just a cautionary tale about crazy cult members, we miss the point. These were human beings, flawed, searching, vulnerable in ways we all are. They wanted to belong, to matter, to be part of something larger than themselves, and someone weaponized that desire. The investigations eventually close. The bodies are buried. Jonestown is abandoned to the jungle, which slowly reclaims the buildings, the pavilion, the land where so many fell. But the questions remain. How do you spot manipulation before it consumes you? When does inspiration become control? What's the difference between faith and submission? And perhaps most urgently, if it happened to them, what makes us think it couldn't happen to us? Because the scariest truth about Jonestown isn't that it was the work of a monster. It's that it was the work of a man, a human being who understood exactly which buttons to push, which fears to amplify, which hopes to exploit. And those buttons exist in all of us. Stand in the clearing today, decades later. The jungle has taken back almost everything. Vines crawl over the foundation where the pavilion once stood. Trees push through what used to be living quarters. The only sounds are birds, insects, and wind moving through leaves. You'd never know that nearly 1,000 people once lived here, worked here, died here. But if you listen closely, if you really pay attention, you can almost hear the echoes. Children laughing before they understood what was coming. The crackle of loudspeakers carrying promises that turned into commands. The moment hope became horror. Jonestown wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning written in blood that we're still trying to read. Because here's what we need to understand. This wasn't a story about evil defeating good. It was a story about good intentions twisted so slowly, so carefully, that people didn't recognize the transformation until escape was impossible. Jim Jones started by feeding the hungry. He ended by destroying everyone who'd believed in him. He promised equality in a world divided by race. He delivered a dictatorship where questioning meant punishment and loyalty meant surrender. He spoke of building paradise. He created a prison where the bars were made of fear, isolation, and the crushing weight of incremental control. And in the end, over 900 lives vanished in a single day, the largest deliberate loss of American civilian life until September 11th, 2001. But here's the detail that should keep us awake at night. Most of those people didn't start as followers of a madman. They started as followers of a vision. A nurse who wanted to heal the world, a teacher who wanted to change it, a parent who wanted their children to grow up in a place where skin color didn't determine destiny. These weren't weak people. They were hopeful people. And hope, when weaponized by someone who understands human psychology, can become the most dangerous force imaginable. Researchers have spent decades studying what happened, the psychology of obedience, the mechanics of coercion, the incremental steps that transform a community into a cage. And they've discovered something unsettling. The tactics Jones used aren't unique to him. They're a blueprint: isolation, sleep deprivation, public humiliation, manufactured external threats, rewarding loyalty and punishing doubt, small surrenders building to total submission. You see versions of it in abusive relationships, authoritarian regimes, even corporate cultures and online communities. Anywhere someone leverages power over people's basic needs, belonging, safety, purpose, and then slowly tightens the grip. Here's a question worth sitting with. At what point does leadership become domination? When does a group you've joined become a group you can't leave? When does faith in a cause become submission to a person? When does community become captivity? The line is thinner than we'd like to believe. And it's rarely crossed in one dramatic leap. It's crossed in tiny steps, each one justified, each one seemingly reasonable in isolation. Give up your apartment to live communally. It's cheaper, more sustainable. Hand over your paycheck. We're pooling resources for the greater good. Cut ties with family who don't understand. They're holding you back. Move to a remote location. We'll be safer there, together. Until one day you wake up and realize you have no money, no home to return to, no support system outside the group, and no way out that doesn't cost you everything. Survivors of Jonestown carry that realization like a wound that never fully heals. One woman, who escaped into the jungle and hid until rescuers arrived, later said the hardest part wasn't the fear. It was the shame. How did I not see it? She asked. How did I let it get that far? But that question misses the point. She didn't let anything happen. She was subjected to one of the most sophisticated psychological operations in modern history, executed by a man who'd spent his entire life studying how to control people. The failure wasn't hers. It was his, and ours. For not recognizing the warning signs sooner, for not acting when people begged for help, for not understanding that isolation and control are always precursors to tragedy. Decades have passed since that November day in 1978. The news cameras have long since left. The investigations closed, the bodies buried. Most of the world has moved on, relegating Jonestown to a historical footnote, a cautionary tale, a phrase people use without remembering its origin. But the families haven't moved on. The survivors haven't, and neither should we. Because Jonestown isn't ancient history. It's a mirror reflecting something uncomfortable about human nature. Our need to belong. Our desire for leaders who promise certainty in uncertain times. Our willingness to trade freedom for the feeling of safety. And in a world increasingly fractured by division, where people retreat into echo chambers and follow charismatic figures who offer simple answers to complex problems, that mirror has never been more relevant. So ask yourself, what would it take for you to surrender your autonomy, your critical thinking, your ability to say no? You might think the answer is nothing, that you'd see it coming, that you'd resist. But 900 people thought the same thing, and they were wrong. Not because they were stupid or weak, but because they were human, just like you, just like all of us. If this story has made you think, really think, about influence, control, and the fragile line between trust and manipulation, then share it. Let others wrestle with these questions, because understanding how Jonestown happened is the only way to prevent it from happening again. Leave a comment below. How far do you think fear can push someone? At what point does loyalty become dangerous? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're vital ones. And subscribe, because we'll keep exploring the cases that reveal the darkest capabilities of human influence. Not to shock you, not to entertain you, but to arm you with the awareness that might someday save you or someone you love from following the wrong person into the jungle. Jonestown ended in silence. But its lesson should echo forever. Question everything, protect your autonomy, and never ever surrender your conscience to someone else, no matter how compelling their vision, how persuasive their words, or how desperate you are to believe. Because the cost of that surrender, as 909 people discovered too late, is everything.